Welcome to Mishna study. Masechet Demai, Perek Vav, Mishnah Bet. Over here, we're continuing on the same thread of renting a field. This Mishnah, we're going to speak about renting it from a non-Jew. Right? So last Mishnah, we spoke about Hamkabel Sadeh Israel and Hachocher Sadeh Israel, and what the laws were over there. Over there, remember, if you rented, right, if it was a specific, if it was a percentage-wise, right, then you could just split it up in front of them. And if you're renting with a set amount, right, I'm paying X amount of, grain, 2 tons of grain, then we said you have to separate Tirumah first and then give it to the Israel. Over here, we're going to speak about if you are renting from a Goy, from a Nochri. החוכר שדה מן הנוכרי, מעשר ונותן לו. רבי יהודה אומר, אף המקבל שדה אבותיו מן הגוי, מעשר ונותן לו. So firstly, the case is the chocher, right? That's the first case we're speaking about. If a person is renting from a goy, and like we said in last Mishnah, when we have hachira, when you have the concept of chocher, that's when you're paying a set amount of fruits, not a percentage, right? It's a quantitative amount that you're going to give to the goy. In this case, we say you need to be ma'aser, and that's not just to be torem, like we said in last Mishnah, you have to just separate terumot. Over here, you need to separate even ma'asrot, right? Terumot and ma'asrot, and then are you allowed to take your portion, right? So you need to separate terumot and ma'asrot, pay the goy, and then you get your piece. Now, why do you need to do all this? So it's a knas. It's a fine. It's a fine for the person because he's renting it from a goy. And what's the point of this fine? Because we want Israel to own the land in Eretz Israel, right? This comes from a pasuk in the Torah, "Lo tichrot lahem berit v'lo techonem," right? The Knaani nations that were there when we entered Eretz Israel, the pasuk says, right, you can't have a covenant with them, right? You can't, cut any covenant with them, nor can you v'lo techonem. Right? What's lo techonem? So Chachamim learn over here, right? Lo titen lahem hanaya bakarka. You can't give them, you shouldn't give them their own dwelling in the land, right? So it's your obligation to own the territory, to own the Eretz Israel. And therefore, what do we do over here? We basically force the Jew to pay extra. If he's going to be renting it from a goy, he's going to have to pay a little bit extra. Therefore, right? Right? What's going if the Jew has to pay extra, he's not going to end up renting from him. He's end up renting from another Israel until the goy feels like he needs to go ahead and sell his property because it's not producing what he thinks what it really should. Right? So that's the first case of the Mishnah. If you're renting from a goy, there's a little bit extra that you need to pay, maaser. So it ends up being that it'll come to a term where you'll be able to purchase the property from the goy instead of renting from it. Now, Rabbi Yehuda continues. And Rabbi Yehuda says, even if a person was mekabel sadeh avotav, right? He says, I'm going to work. I'm going to, now it's not chocher over here. Now it's mekabel, so it's a percentage. I'm going to rent a field from a goy. But this field, though, was his father's inheritance. Right? Imagine this was the field that it was his father's, his grandfather's, generation after generation, and for whatever reason, it's not in his family's, property right now. It's not theirs. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Why is it not in his? Why is it not in his, family's inheritance anymore? How come it's not theirs anymore? Why don't they own it? So Rambam doesn't explain over here. Seems like it would be for any reason. Let's say his father sold it. He needed money, he sold it. Bartanura gives an example if it was stolen from him, right? But I don't think Rambam would have to say it's stolen from him, even if it was, not necessarily taken, but even if they sold it. What's the point over here? That if a person now is renting this piece of property from the goy, me'aser v'noten lo, right? Similar to the first case of the Mishnah, he needs to be me'aser, and then, right, and then and give it to him, and then only could he take his piece. Now, what's the point of this? What's Rabbi Yehuda adding over here? Even though, right, well, basically a person really loves his family's inheritance more, right? If it's the house that he grew up on, the field that he grew up with, right? His family's property, generation to generation, he loves that even more, and he's willing to pay for it more, right? Even if let's say it's a partnership, I'm going to pay the goy, a rent now. I mean, usually this thing is worth, paying 25% of the profits for. I'm willing to pay 33% now, right? Because there's so much more value that I'm willing to even pay more for it. Now, if we're going to force him to separate ma'asrot, right, over everything first, and only then take his piece, that in essence would end up causing, right, he have to do all this. All right, in that case, I'm not going to, to work the field. It's not worth it for me at this point. The field will stay bare. Nobody will work it, and it will force the goy to sell it back to the Israel. Right? Rambam seems to, even to this Israel. Baratuna has a different explanation where he says it's actually a different Israel. He's going to see that it's, it's empty for so long. The Israel will see how much others are willing to pay for it, and they say, oh wow, this Jew is willing to pay extra for it. I'm going to purchase it from the goy so I can make money off of it. That's how Baratuna explains it. And Rambam just says, no, regularly, this person will force himself somehow to, the goy's property will be bare, and he's going to want to sell it because no one's going to want to go ahead and use that. Now, Rambam says he doesn't see anyone that's arguing on Rabbi Yehuda, right? Because Tanakama spoke about Hocher, and Rabbi Yehuda over here spoke about a person who's mekabel, right? He's paying a percentage, right? And now who's the halacha going to be like, right? First of all, he said, doesn't seem like they're arguing. But now who's the halacha going to be like? Is it going to be like Rabbi Yehuda also? It's a single opinion. So he says, yes, halacha is also like Rabbi Yehuda. Why? And Rambam gives a reason over here. He says, because the Gemara actually speaks about back and forth about Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in Masechet Baba Metzia. It speaks about Rabbi Yehuda's opinion and its reasoning, and being that it spends so much time on it, the halacha is going to be like him. I just think it's interesting. Why does Rambam go to length to mention over here? Right, last Mishnah he said halacha could be Yehuda. Over here he needs to point out there's no one that argues on Rabbi Yehuda, and why is halacha like him? Because the Gemara is no 7 or 10. It speaks about his opinion so much. Why do you have to do that? Why can't you just say halacha could be Yehuda? I think Rambam over here is pointing out something very unique, and it goes back to what we mentioned earlier. In last Mishnah, what was the language? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ematai, right? And every time we have that, last Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda was explaining. So it's clear that halacha is going to be like Rabbi Yehuda in last Mishnah. But what's the nisuach? How do we have it in our Mishnah over here? We have the words Tanakama, and then Rabbi Yehuda Omer. It's not Amar Rabbi Yehuda ematai. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Whenever you have Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it seems to be an argument. But over here, Rambam is saying, being that it doesn't seem like he's arguing on the same point, it's not the same subject as the first half of the Mishnah. So being that it's different, we're going to say Rabbi Yehuda is mentioning a different point. He's not explaining the first part. It's a totally different point, and halacha is like him because of the Gemara in Baba Metzia.